want to welcome a great champion for broadband, for competition, who serves on committees of significant importance to our industry, both on the technology, the internet, all of the infrastructure. She serves on the Commerce Committee, Judiciary Committee, Education, Agriculture.
It's like a quiz.
Is the chair of the Senate Broadband Caucus and the Senate Rules Committee. How could I forget? But she is, an important voice in the most important debates facing our country and our industry. And so we're very thankful that she has come today to give a keynote and to talk about the issues of most importance to all of us in this room. So with no further ado, Senator Amy Klobuchar, thank you for coming.
Appreciate it. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. And it's wonderful to be here and to get off the hill for a little bit, I will say. There's a lot going on. As you know, we're not in a shutdown, or I might not be able to be here. We also have been working on the budget, somewhat apropos of our topic at hand of competition. I've been working to try to make sure that the Antitrust Division of Justice, which is not the topic of my talk today, gets funded as we believed, Senator Grassley and I believed that it would be with the merger fee change that we passed on something like 88-8 vote. You know, you only get that for volleyball resolutions there. And so we've been working about some technical language that's in there. It all sounds really small ball, but it's really big ball. And so we've been trying to get that changed, and that's been occupying my mind. But now I get to come and see you and kind of go out for the forest, for the trees, and talk a little bit about all the work that you're doing and what needs to be done to expand and to make sure that we have strong competition in America. And I want to thank Chip and Angie for inviting me. And I know there's reps from Great Plains Communications and Metronet here. Where are you guys? Somewhere? Oh, there. Of course, Minnesotans in the back. Yes. Humble. Thank you so much. I did notice they were the audience members that were nodding their head when I started out. Thank you. So just so some of you know, my street creds to be here is I started out at a law firm. I was actually in the private sector for 14 years. That's part of why I really care about competition. And one of my first big clients was MCI. I actually changed law firms to keep representing them when there was a conflict. I loved doing their work. Back then, they were a really scrappy company. The federal law was in the midst of getting passed, and we were basically taking on the Bell monopolies at the time to get into the market. The case had been done, but it was a time where they're actually doing the work. And I always loved at some of the regulatory hearings, which were maybe a little mundane sometimes, but I remember I told the story of how when Alexander Graham Bell, the first words he said, as we all know, when we got the telephone was, "Come here, Watson, I need you," right? That was the first thing he said on the telephone. And at the hearings, I'd note that in the Wild West world of MCI, when they were getting ready to relay the first communication between St. Louis and Chicago, the investor, Irwin Hirsch, memorialized that great moment, not exactly with "Come here, Watson, I need you," but these words, "I'll be damned, it actually works." And I know that many of your companies and people you work with might feel the same way when new discoveries are made, when new innovations are made. But that really drove me, that work with MCI, which I loved, and started doing work for them all over the region before I became the prosecutor. It really it drove me to be a big believer in competition policy, because I saw what happened when they got in the market. I also represented McCaw Communications, by the way, and I was able to see how that really spawned a cell phone market, right? Before, when they were the big bricks, like the phone in Wall Street, and how it brought down long distance charges in a big way. And that's why, if you wonder why I get kind of obsessed with making sure we still have competition, in tech and other fields, and that we have broadband so that people can access things. It is really driven from that experience and from seeing what it means when we have actual competition. I'm also a big believer in capitalism, and I believe that one of the ways you do that is by make sure you're guided there is by enforcement of our competition laws. It was one of the grandfathers of capitalism who said, yes, beware beware, I want to get the words right here, beware the unbridled power of monopolies. And we got to remember that as we go forward. I actually wrote a book on all of this. It was called Antitrust. If you remember during the presidential campaign, my friend Pete Buttigieg, we truly are friends, would go back and forth a little bit in the debates. And since we're on Super Tuesday, I may as well commemorate that moment. One of the more amusing things is when we got done with the campaign, Pete wrote a New York Times best-selling book called Trust, and not to be outdone, 1 year later, I came out with my own 2 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list book, Antitrust. That is actually a true story. So I want to talk about, first of all, INCOMPAS. Your members have been great partners in the effort to close the digital divide and bring fast, affordable, reliable, and competitive high-speed internet access to every household and mobile phone in America. Your work is the bedrock of our digital economy. And we all know that you can't participate in 2024 in the marketplace if you can't get online. It's about education. It's about healthcare. I visit all 87 counties in Minnesota every year. Some counties are so small, I know every single person in the county. But I also visit a lot of rural hospitals, including just about last month when I was up for Hockey Days, whole nother story, in War Road, Minnesota. Just so you know, there has never been a gold medal men's hockey team in the Olympics without a player from, not just Minnesota, from a town of 1,500 people, War Road, Minnesota. And went to some hospitals near there. And the use of technology, if they're very innovative, is phenomenal because they've realized that a lot of their seniors, some of this came out of the pandemic, are much better off accessing from home now that they've learned to use it, or coming into, more likely, into their hospital, their rural hospital. They set it up. They've got their primary doctor there. That's clinic. It's clinics attached to hospital. And then they get a doctor from Mayo or someone else who talks to them through what's going on. And this is just an increasing use of technology in sort of some of the last mile areas, I would say, that must have a high-speed internet. And you see this with mental health care up the wazoo. All of the innovation going on that is a must for these areas that aren't going to be able to have a doctor with every specialty or have a mental health provider. It's a game changer, but it's not going to exist or be expanded if they don't have high speed. I remember at several hearings, I've used examples of why we need high speed to every household. And my favorite was when one of my colleagues, I always use this example, like I met the mom of a high school kid who had to do all of his biology exams in a liquor store parking lot. That's a true story, right? And my colleague goes, I don't know if you want to keep talking about that kid going in the liquor store. I'm like, no, that was the only place that had high speed. No, they just didn't get it because I don't think they have a lot of rural areas. These are true stories of what goes on. The doctors who sit in the McDonald's parking lot reading x-rays. So that was why I was such a big believer in the bipartisan infrastructure law. I do want to thank my colleagues who worked on it. I worked on the broadband part because I led that bill with Clyburn. But the group that worked on it, I mentioned that today because Senator Sinema has announced today she's not running again. And I just want to say a thank you to her for her work on that agreement and negotiating, including this latest agreement where I worked extensively with her trying to help my Afghan refugees, the 80,000 people who are here that are interpreters that worked with our troops that are still in limbo. And she worked really hard to include that in the border bill. It got included, and then unfortunately that part of it we will see another day, I hope, because really important part, but it's just an example of the work she does every single day. So the bipartisan infrastructure law, you know, it makes sense to me that we go those extra last miles. I have some counties in my state that maybe 20% don't have high speed. I look at it, having visited Iceland once, and saw that they had the best high-speed internet next to spewing volcanoes. Maybe, just maybe, we can get it on the Canadian border, where there's like no hills at all. So those are some of the things that have really motivated me to get involved in this. You know, the investment we've seen in states across the country, and also making it more affordable. That program has already empowered over 20 million American households to get online, including 218,000 in my state, but who's counting? Other things that I have worked on and believe in when it comes to fair competition, net neutrality. Since the Communications Act was enacted in 1934, Congress always intended for the FCC to have the authority to ensure Americans have reliable and state-of-the-art communication service. As you know, way back, that meant telephone. Now it means broadband. And for years, net neutrality provided the framework to do just that. It held large internet providers accountable for providing the connection consumers expect while promoting investments in next generation broadband networks. It's also a reason, one of the reasons, the internet became one of the great American success stories, transforming not only how we communicate, but also the way companies do business, how consumers buy goods, and how we educate our kids. Unfortunately, from my perspective, it was repealed in 2018, and I continue to believe we're going to have to focus in that area and make sure that everyone is going to be able to access the internet on an affordable basis, especially with AI coming along. I'll get to that in a moment. There's just a reason that we want to make sure that it continues to be accessible. I'm glad that this last year, the FCC took the first steps toward restoring net neutrality, and I look forward to working with the Commission, along with business leaders from across the telecom sector, to make sure we have a fair and open internet. Next up, privacy. I have always found that to be one of the more ironic things. I don't think you thought I'd say that. In the lobbying world of Washington, D.C., in that when I first got to the Senate, no one really wanted to have a federal privacy law. The companies were lobbying against it. It's kind of instructive for just kind of giving a little at the beginning, and maybe that's a good way to be, because there was all this lobbying against it, and then you know what happens, right? We see it happen all over. Then the states start having to fill in the void. And so then one state does something you think is okay, oh, that's okay. Then another state does something you hate, oh no. And then pretty soon you have a patchwork of laws. And so now a number of the same companies are saying, we need a federal privacy law, which I believed all along. And I'm still hopeful. I'm on Senator Cantwell's bill. There's a number of other proposals way back. I had a proposal with Senator Kennedy on these lines. And I just hope we're able to reach some kind of agreement so that we have a federal privacy law like so many other countries have. It would just make it a lot easier for everyone. Other things along these lines that I'm just hopeful we can move on very soon is kid safety on the internet. You know, we had that rather famous hearing and recently, and I myself am sort of done with the throwing the popcorn at people, and I think we need to actually legislate and get something done. I think one of the issues that's so challenging for families with the internet right now is, yes, what's on it, on the platforms in terms of what their kids can see, and the need to do everything we can to help those parents be parents. I'm glad that we're going to empower them with better tools and the like, but I do get sometimes just relying on that as opposed to just trying to get the stuff off of there and monitor better through technology. Would be better. One mom told me she knows there's all these controls, but she has 3 kids, and every time she tries to get one thing on one platform, then another thing, the kid gets around it, and she has to have her older kid try to teach the younger kids what to do, and she just is finally, she said it just reminds her like there's a big sink in front of her and it's overflowing all the time, and she's just out there with a mop trying to clean it up. That was her words, not mine. And I think we just have to remember that as we look at how can we put in some laws that are actually going to work, so that these kids don't get exposed to really dangerous content. It's one of the reasons I'm working on, say, the revenge porn issue and some of the issues with that you're seeing where kids think their life is over because someone has tricked them into sending a naked picture. We've had 15 suicides, according to the FBI, of kids just this year. And that we just need, this is becoming more and more fentanyl-laced pills. 30% of people that have exposure to fentanyl do it off the internet. We're going to have to do something on this kids front in addition to the privacy law. And then we go into some of my other stuff I'm not going to talk about today on competition. And all of this, I just think putting our heads in the sand, because the privacy stuff is probably a great example of that. If you wait so long and you do nothing, and that's why Senator Schumer and Young and Heinrich and Rounds are trying to move on AI, so we have a bipartisan agreement, then you're left with just not really a cohesive federal policy. And that's why on AI, I think we need some rules of the road. So I'm one of the few senators that attended nearly every session. I had a near perfect attendance record of the meetings that they had on AI. And maybe because of my background, the work I've done with tech, I have appreciated that a number of the companies have come forward and said, we want to have some rules of the road in place when it comes to AI. And as you know, we've been working with them as well as consumer groups, nonprofit groups, and the like to try to get those agreements. First and foremost, Senator Thune and I, neighbors in Minnesota and South Dakota, he's a little taller than me, have introduced kind of a base bill for non-security AI. And that would be setting standards for the federal government when it comes to, and with a number of the companies and groups have endorsed this bill. We kind of divide the non-security topics into two areas. One is high impact, things that could be more dangerous, like critical infrastructure, criminal justice, biometric identification. For example, if a power grid is using AI to improve efficiency, we need to make sure those systems undergo rigorous testing. So it puts some higher standards on some of those uses of AI. And then a second group is the ones maybe healthcare, education, where we task NIST, which is widely believed to be the one that could do this, with developing some of these standards, then giving them to the agencies instead of just expecting each agency is going to go off on their own. I'm talking about here federal agencies. That seems a little scary. So the idea is that NIST would be a coordinating force. Do you work at NIST? No, I'm kidding. No, he works at an agency. Okay. To be able to put those standards out first. Other things, voice scams. I am really concerned about this and protecting people's identities and voices in general. I was just meeting with our veterans groups on this, and my state director at home, her son is in the Marines, and at the time they got this call, he was deployed and they didn't know where, they weren't supposed to know where. And they get this call, her husband, who is a recently retired reporter, and gets a call, and it's their son's voice. It's been scraped off the internet and says, Dad, I'm in trouble. I need your help. I need your help. And I think if it was some grandpa or if it was someone that was more naive than a somewhat cynical reporter, I think that they might have fallen for it. But he immediately starts saying, where are you? How can you be calling me? And then hung up. And so that is just one example. And I've talked to other families that have seen this too. So they scraped his voice off the internet, and we're probably trying to suck the parent into sending money, which is what we've seen in a lot of places. So Senator Collins and I have teamed up to call on the FTC and the FCC to raise awareness and prevent AI voice cloning scams. I just think you're going to see more of this. Last thing, I've been really focusing my work on AI, and all of these things I hope will be included in this base framework. Oh, yeah, I'm going to start talking about democracy. And okay, there we go. Thank you, Russia. That's nice. Okay, so this is going to be like hair on fire problem if we don't do something about it. I believe the FEC is going to try to use what they can of their laws And they've traditionally been pretty dysfunctional. They've been doing a few more things on a bipartisan basis lately with some of the newer people we put on. And I chair the Rules Committee. It's in our jurisdiction. And so I'm hopeful they will step up in some way. You've already seen FCC and others. But the best thing would be is if we put in some clear rules in law when it comes to our election. And what we've seen so far is disturbing. New Hampshire primary in January, fake robocalls using the president's voice to tell people not to vote. We now know that came out of a Democratic campaign, although the candidate was not aware. Won't say who it is. They hired a magician and he talked. I don't know. But that is a very kind of lukewarm little example, but just put it out where there's actual major forces trying to do this in a big way. And you could literally trick voter after voter after voter into thinking it is your own candidate. Last year, one Republican presidential candidate released false AI-generated images of former President Trump hugging Dr. Fauci. Viral video of what appears to be my colleague Elizabeth Warren, where she basically says Republicans shouldn't be allowed to vote. It wasn't her, but a lot of people thought it was. And this is not AI, but if you don't believe me how bad this is going to be, just 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, if you saw the horrific shooting, the murder of the 2 police officers in Minnesota, they were killed and they rescued 7 kids. They got those kids out of that house and then they were shot. And the paramedic that went in, ran in to rescue them, was doing CPR, was also killed. Well, a few days after that, photo goes out on the internet, and it was a true picture of me at a rally, at a political rally. Keith Ellison was in the photo. We actually have the picture, which is not going to be normal when these things happen. And someone, and I actually think it's foreign interest based on attacks I've had on my advocacy, on strong advocacy on Ukraine, but they put defund the police signs in the hands of everyone there. I was strongly against defund the police. I lead the bill for cops funding in the Senate, the cops bill. But that thing went viral. And finally, we had to call X and Facebook, and actually we could show the actual photo, which is most people, and they put altered content, false content. There were some articles written, and it basically went away. But that's just one example of not using AI, of the pure evil of what we're going to see coming out of this when it comes to democracy. So that is why 2 bills that I lead because of my role with the Rules Committee. The first is to go after the really bad stuff, the deep fakes, we call it. That bill I have with Josh Hawley, and it actually bans the deep fakes. It has exceptions for things like satire. We've had it reviewed by Democratic and Republican lawyers. Susan Collins, I saw your face over there. Susan Collins is on the bill, as well as many, many Democrats, strongly supported by Democrats. Ricketts is on the bill. I think people realize that people are going to mess around with this on both sides if we don't have some clear rules in place. The other bill, it's Yvette Clarke's bill. We're also working on a bipartisan one right now with some other senators that I didn't mention, but that is a labeling bill, right? Not for like every little thing you use AI for, which is a problem. We had a hearing on this and I kind of thought, you don't want to you change the color a little and then produced by AI, it's going to make it meaningless as a label. So we're trying to capture that middle ground of things that are significant, but they're not the deep fakes, to put that labeling on it. And so that is another bill that will be introduced, I believe, soon. And similar, Yvette Clarke's done a lot of the work in the House. So just wanted to let you know, I know it may not be the #1 thing on your mind, but I do think it's going to become just a huge, as the president would say, huge effing deal if we do not get ahead of it and get something on the books now, which will enable the platforms to say, no, we're taking this down because. No, you have to have a label on this because as you know, I'm not telling you a secret in the area of politics, if they start going off and just making up their own stuff, which they may have to do because they won't have a choice, it's much better if it's cemented in legislation of what the rules of the road should be. So those are some of the things that I am working on. right now, but I am really excited in my own state, just of the expansion of high speed. We have already seen what that means for people. I'm a big believer that if you grow up in rural Minnesota, you should be able to live in rural Minnesota. I love our small towns, and that's not going to happen if you don't have the access to high-speed internet. So for those of you on that area of work, I want to thank you. For those of you in the kind of tech provider side, thank you for all the great innovations that you have given us. And I'm just hopeful that we're going to be able to come up with some rules of the road that actually work when it comes to the children's issues that I mentioned, privacy, and when it comes to competition policy or news organizations. There's just a lot of the things that have been just sitting there waiting for action. And I just think it's time to kind of find some kind of compromise so we can move ahead, and hopefully AI will go out there first, because we have to do that immediately and can be a model for us getting ahead of things instead of suddenly saying, oh, we've gone years now. Companies are no longer little startups in a garage. Like every medical device company in Minnesota starts in a garage. And now what are we going to do? We don't have any rules in place. It just doesn't seem like a good way to run a railroad. And as someone that strongly believes in competition and capitalism, I want it to thrive. And one way it thrives is if we have rules so that people feel good about the businesses that they work with, and they don't get ripped off, and they don't have bad stuff happen, and their kids don't get addicted to fentanyl. I could go on and on, but we've got to just try to do better. And I wrote a book, actually, I'll end with this, in the last year that was maybe not so aptly called The Joy of Politics. Just so suitable for our times. It actually came out on it was announced the same day that Bernie's book was announced, and my book is called The Joy of Politics, and Bernie's book is called It's Okay to Be Angry at Capitalism. True story. And so this was at the end of, not this year, the end of last year. And so I was desperately trying to get that Afghan refugee bill I just told you about done back then. It had this, but Lindsey Graham's my lead author, and it's got, Ricker, all these people on it. It's a big, big deal to the military to get this done. And I just couldn't get it attached to anything. And I was just getting madder and madder and getting this way and obstacle that way. Bernie kept coming up to me on the floor and going, "Where's the joy? I don't see the joy." So I hope I answered some of this for you today. There is joy in supporting the great work that you do. There is joy in trying to find common ground, because courage is no longer, can you just stand in an empty Senate chamber and scream at people? Courage is whether or not you're willing to stand next to people you don't always agree with for the betterment of this country. So I hope you take those words and that joy with you. And I'm going to go back to that fun house right now. Thank you, everyone.
There is love and joy and hope still in Congress. And so we're thankful for Senator Klobuchar, her work, her commitment to competition. And we're very thankful that she came to share all of her work with us today.